How do you follow up one of the most immersive medieval RPGs ever created? Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 not only answers that question, it sets a new standards for sequels. Hello, I'm Conduit Gaming. Please just call me Conduit. Please like and subscribe if you're here. Let's get into the video. Kingdom Come Deliverance was a sleeper hit that came out in 2018, around 7 years ago now at the time of recording. It takes place in medieval Bohemia, now known as Czechia, or the Czech Republic, or if you play Hearts of Iron 4, Czechoslovakia. You play as Henry of Skalitz, a regular person and blacksmith who, after having his village raided and destroyed, he becomes a footman for his local lord, and he turns from a peasant into a full-fledged badass. Now this game is a lot different than your standard medieval RPG slop that comes out somewhat frequently. First of all, this game is all about historical accuracy and realism. How you look affects how NPCs react to you. If you're trying to intimidate someone, you better be armed and have armor on. If you're trying to be charismatic, then you need to make sure that you're washed up and your clothes aren't dirty, which you have to clean by either washing them in a trough or going to a bathhouse and having your clothes professionally laundered. You have to make sure to eat enough food and sleep so Henry has enough strength and energy to do things, and you can't eat bad or rotten food. If it's in your inventory for too long, it starts to rot and go bad, and if you eat that rotten food, you get food poisoning in-game, which, depending on how bad the food you ate was, can kill you. When you wear a helmet, if it has a visor and you want to pull it down for extra protection, you actually have to look through a visor when wearing it. It limits your visibility. Time limits also matter in games. In a lot of games, Bethesda, when there is a urgent task to complete, it actually isn't urgent. The game will just continue to wait and wait for you. It does not matter. But in Kingdom Come Deliverance, when the game tells you that something is going to happen in 2 days, it is going to happen in 2 days. If they tell you something is urgent, it is actually urgent. With the exception of a couple main storyline quests, the game will not wait for you. And if you put stuff off, your journey can be cut early when you're in the middle of doing something because the game is over. You didn't do what you were supposed to do in the time frame that it told you to do it. Unlike other games, as I mentioned, you start out as a total zero. You can barely wield a sword, you have little strength, you can't even read. That's right, you actually have to do a quest in-game to learn how to read. But because of that, the game just feels so much more satisfying, and you feel real progression from the start of the game and being a total dunce and dumbass to the end of the game where you can confidently take on anyone in a fight or with your words. You also get better by doing things in-game, much like Skyrim. When you fight with swords, your sword skills increases. As such, your strength. When you talk to people, your speech gets better. But unlike Skyrim or other RPGs, this game doesn't just throw you straight to the wolves at the start of the game to increase your skills. You have to train with sword masters to get better without getting hurt or dying. They also teach you new skills or an actual point of going to them and learning things. The game's historical backdrop is also rather interesting. It takes place right before the Hussite Wars officially start, which is actually interesting. If you don't know anything about the Hussites, they were a proto-reformist movement before Martin Luther. Jan Hus was a charismatic preacher who started the Hussite movement. He sort of talked about the evils of the church, how they should go back to poverty, how they own too much, sort of general reformist stuff. And they also mention it a bunch in-game, but if you know nothing about the Hussite Wars, you just kind of hear about a strange priest. But beyond the religious drama at the time, there's also a civil war going on between Wencelas and Sigismund. I definitely butchered that first name, sorry, I'm not Czech. Your liege lord and Ratai backs Wencelas, who was king before his brother Sigismund kidnapped him, and now, you do not actually have to know any history to enjoy this game. Honestly, I think it's more enjoyable and more immersive if you do not know anything other than the fact that you support Wencelas. Because that's honestly all a peasant would really know. They don't know the politics or bigger picture matters. All they know is what their local lord supports, and as far as they're concerned, that's what's right. But as the story progresses, a lot of characters are willing to tell you more, so I recommend going in blind. The story in the first game is incredible. But of course, there are some issues like janky combat. A large complaint was having to fight multiple enemies at once. It felt really terrible. There was also a steep learning curve, which caused a lot of gamers to drop it when it first came out, which Happened to me, my first playthrough, but, give me a little bit of grace. I was in middle school. I thought it was going to be like Skyrim. I was not expecting an immersive sim. People also didn't enjoy how a lot of quests actually required you to use your brain somewhat. I'm not trying to sound like a Rick and Morty fanboy, but it's not like other RPGs where there are just markers above every quest item or location. A lot of times it will just give you a general location that you have to search instead of the game just telling you where everything is. Like it might say there was an ambush at this crossroads, go investigate. It might give you the general location of the crossroads, but it will not just point you straight to the crossroads. If you have to investigate and follow a trail of blood, you actually have to follow it. It will not just guide you from checkpoint to checkpoint. You actually have to use your eyes and your brain. Also had a variety of bugs and other issues at launch, like rendering, things not loading in right, things of that variety. But obviously those have all been fixed now. The game did come out 7 years ago. But this game basically came out of nowhere, and then after some DLC, it went quiet while they worked on the sequel. And people were pretty hyped, I include myself in that, but how does a company follow up a masterpiece like the first game? Well, they do that by releasing a game like Kingdom Come 2. This sequel is perfect in every way, and it is as direct of a sequel as possible. It literally picks up right after the first one ends. Now, I will not be talking too much about the story of the second game because I do not want to spoil it. Please experience these games for yourself. But I will talk about specific moments in game to illustrate points or maybe bring up how cool something is. This second game does everything the first game does, but better. Combat has been refined a little bit. In the first game, there was 5 points in combat you had to block or attack from, but in the sequel, they combined the bottom 2 points into 1, which of course sacrifices a little complexity, but I think it helps a lot of new players grasp combat easier and makes combos easier. Of course, does it streamline the game a little bit? Yeah, but I think it ultimately helps serve the game better and introduce it to a wider audience. And this game is easier in general because you're now playing as an experienced Henry who already has starting skills and isn't a complete peasant. They have not really simplified any other game mechanics. They even added a couple new game mechanics, like there is now smithing where you can smith new weapons and equipment for yourself, either to sell or equip. You actually have to heat up the metal yourselves and then hit it with a hammer, and then you actually have to make sure you do it the right way, otherwise you're going to get lower quality gear. And early game, this is a great way to make money. They have also added a whole lot of new weapons, including guns, but remember, this does take place during the early 15th century. It actually takes place in the year 1403. So there's nothing like pistols or muskets, there are hand cannons. And they are exactly what they sound like. They look like little mini cannons on the end of a stick. They are similar to blunderbusses is what I would compare them most to, where you can aim with them and try to be a marksman, but they are hard to aim with and they have no sights. I think they're a lot more useful as shotguns. They also added crossbows into game, which are generally easier to use than bows, but they are also weaker. They also added long arms like spears and halberds and focards. I'm not pronouncing that right, but a different type of spear. While they were in the last game, they weren't usable for your character, and now you can use them. There's also some new swords and axes to use. They increased the amount of everything, including armor. The AI has also been completely revamped and they act a lot smarter. Firstly, all the jank around fighting multiple opponents has been removed. In the first game, a lot of the trouble came from the game auto-locking you to opponents who were attacking you. So when there was multiple, your screen would start to go kind of haywire, auto-locking from opponent to opponent. In this new game, you stay locked to an opponent either until you choose to lock to someone else or you block someone else's attack. Then it auto-locks you to them. It makes the whole experience feel a lot smoother. I also feel like the opponents are programmed to somewhat attack in waves. Like when you're facing 3 opponents, they are not going to bum rush you. Rather, they are going to take turns attacking you and maybe try to maneuver to your side or around you. But if you are heavily outnumbered, then they will attack you from all sides. I think the intention is definitely to just make the game a bit easier and kind of get over the hump of there being a lot of difficulty when you're outnumbered. Now, you could make the argument that it might be somewhat more realistic when you outnumber someone and they do not just want to bum rush you because, of course, weapons are sharp and anybody can die with just a single stroke. Nobody should act foolhardy in battle. But that's just a bit of a cope. I do think they just did it to help out the player a little bit. The AI is also a lot smarter when it comes to doing some mischievous things. Like it can guess when you steal stuff from them. If you go into someone's home and steal like a piece of bread, the AI will notice, and if there is a witness seeing you enter and leave the house, next time you come to the village, they might ask you to empty your pockets, or they might even call the guards right then and there. And then there is also a new tension system. So if you continue to steal and cause mayhem in a town without being caught, tension will increase and increase, which makes the townspeople more likely to call the guards whenever anything suspicious happens, or even take up arms themselves, and you're more likely to be stopped by the guards. The map is also a lot bigger. There are now 2 locations to explore. There is Trotsky and Kutenberg. I would reckon that the map overall is at least twice as big as Kingdom Come Deliverance 1, and that's at a minimum. There are also a lot of varied locations like Kutenberg, which itself is a huge town unlike anything in the first game. In Kingdom Come 1, the largest town was Rattay, I'm pretty sure they pronounce it Rattay, which seems like a quaint village compared to Kutenberg. There are also a lot of castles and villages dotted around, and a lot of the castles are based on real-world locations, much like the first game. Trotsky Castle is pretty close to being a one-to-one recreation of the real thing, which after you see it in game, seriously look it up in real life. It is crazy that medieval people built that. There's also a pretty huge variety of towns and other small villages and castles dotted around the landscape that you can explore. There's also a variety of activities for you to do, much like the first game. There are fight clubs to join, people to beat up. There are a huge variety of side quests to do not related to the main quest, which I will say the main quest is pretty long, which, I mean, that's good. I'm not complaining. My first playthrough, I did around 34 hours-ish, and I completed maybe half the side quests and all the main quests, and that's without doing all the other tasks. There's smithing, as I mentioned. You can also play dice. You can get drunk. There is a million things to do in game, and then you can also steal or cause mayhem. This game is a lot more, I'll call it GTA friendly. Unlike the first game where there wasn't really too many places to cause chaos, now you can really cause chaos on a mass scale, especially with a gun. Another thing I want to mention is the romances. There are around, I don't know, I want to say 5 women that you can sleep with, and 1 man. People bitch about that. I'll talk about that later. And then you can also pay to have sex with prostitutes in bathhouses. So there is some romance. It's not super deep, just a couple conversations here and there as the game progresses, depending on which one of the women you're talking to. And there's also a massive codex in game, so if you want to learn more about the real world history and locations, everything is in game for you to learn about, such as the real world historical figures that the characters are based on, as a lot of them were real people, even though they might have been aged up or down, or, you know, maybe they're brought back to life for the purposes of the game, but a lot of them are based on real people. Another thing this game does great is the story, and the second one, it does not disappoint. While being linear, there are a lot of different ways to achieve your goals, and you can roleplay how you want. Do you want to be an honorable knight who uses a longsword? Go ahead. Do you want to be a scoundrel who sneaks around and steals all the time? You can do it. Do you want to be a bloodthirsty brute who makes the most bloodthirsty decisions all the time? You can play Henry how you want, and characters and the game comment on it. There are also a lot more huge battles in this game compared to its predecessor, where there was maybe like 2 huge set piece battles where there was like more than 20 minutes at a time engaged in combat. In this game, there is a huge amount of battles. There are multiple sieges to play through, multiple big battles. There are multiple massive melees. This game really just feels a lot more epic than the first, and they're able to, since they updated the engine, have a lot more people on screen than they were the last time. So, I enjoyed the game a lot, but I do want to touch on some of the culture war issues surrounding this game. I guess I'll start off. I think most of the complaints are pretty ridiculous. There have been a lot of people calling the game woke. I disagree with that statement entirely. I'll go over the points I've seen raised one by one. So, first off, Henry and Hans Capon can be gay. That's right, you have the option to have a gay romance with your best friend from the first game. So I've seen mostly 2 reasons for why this shouldn't be in the game. 1, being gay back then was a crime and heavily looked down upon. So, of course, this is true. But when you do the gay romance, it's not like you guys go around, holding hands, kissing each other. gay people did exist back then. They did know how to keep it hidden. And then the second reason that people do not like it is that people say that Henry is canonically straight as well as Hans Capon. Their evidence is that in a YouTube comment from the former community manager responded to someone that Henry is straight. The community manager said that Henry is straight. So first off, community managers are not in charge of writing the game or the canon of the story at large. And also, the same writers of the first game are still at the company and wrote the second game. I think they have a pretty good clue of what's going on. And the current community manager said that the only things that are canon are in-game. There are no tie-in comic books. There are no tie-in books. The only thing that is confirmed true in the universe is what you play on the screen. I mean, it's an RPG. You can play how you want. There are 5 women you can have relations with. People are acting like the game forces you to be gay. No. If you don't click on the first romance option with Hans, it basically never comes up again. I think it only comes up one other time after that. If you don't click that option, there is nothing to it. You and Hans just continue your friendship. I saw that people were saying that that sort of makes your first game friendship feel less special, or that they're trying to trample on it. I'm sorry, it's an RPG. It just adds more choices for the character. It adds more agency to the player. It's a role-playing game. You can play your character how you want. This is rather new. People were saying that the scene is child sodomy because Hans in real life at the time of this game would have been 15. So you're having sex with a minor. This is a beyond stupid point that has to just only be being parroted by people who have not played the game. In game, he is not 15. The real life Hans Capon in 1403 was 15. The game's Hans Capon is not. He is a mid-20s person, and he is also modeled after a mid-20s actor. And in the first game, he is portrayed as a serial womanizer. I didn't see anyone complain in the first game that he was getting statutory raped left and right. In game, he is not treated as 15 at all. In no way is it ever shown or implied that he is under the age of 18. He is always treated as a mid-20s fully grown adult. Another point that people bring up is that there is a black person in this game. So, I don't know. People like to point out that in the first game, the studio got a lot of flack for not wanting to include black people, and they were saying that there was no evidence that there were black people in Czechia at the time, which, again, I agree with. Make the game that you want. They are the developers. But now there is a black person in game. He is an envoy from a sultan, and he is part of the main story quest. I found it personally interesting to have someone in-game from medieval Africa to give a different perspective from his culture and from Africa at a medieval time. People also hated how he says that his culture treats women better and how his homeland is better. So, I don't know. I think people are blowing those statements out of proportion. Is that not what almost everyone thinks back then and even now? I mean, I think everybody generally thinks that their culture is the best and that their homeland is the best. That's a very common sentiment. I think in America that we treat women very well. I think that we have the most freedom, and I honestly think we're the best country on earth. A lot of people would disagree, but I would imagine a lot of people think that about their home country. It kind of goes with the issue where people go like, in my culture, we love food. Food's an experience. Yeah, every culture loves food. Every culture eats dinner. But of course, people think that there is something special about them and their culture. That's how I understood those statements to be. But I don't know. I just find the whole thing to be such a non-issue. Now, I do think there is such a thing as too woke, although I don't like using the word woke because it doesn't have like an actual definition. It's kind of like the word fascist now, where it means something different to everyone. Like Dragon Age Veilguard was rightfully clowned for having over-the-top social messaging. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is not doing that. You have to interact with one black person who has an actual believable reason for being there. And the final reason the game is getting a lot of hate is the fact that there is a synagogue in Gutenberg, which wasn't actually built until the 1800s. And there is a main story quest where you have to help evacuate Jews who are under attack from Sigismund, who orders the Jews attacked and expelled from the city, and they want to take their riches. Now, people are criticizing this for multiple reasons. Sigismund's men start to attack the Jews. They say stuff like, the Lord commands this, God's with us, and the Lord forgives us. Stuff like that. They point to this as the game showing Christians as evil. I don't see that at all. Literally everyone in the game except for the Jews are Christian. The heroes are Christians, the villains are Christians. Everybody, unless explicitly said otherwise, is treated as Christians. This is medieval Bohemia. They are not painting broad strokes like Christians are all evil. Second, I would imagine most religious people, when fighting against another religion, would call to their God. And I also saw it as the soldiers consoling themselves because they were being ordered to attack women and children. Now, in real life, in the 1400s, Gutenberg and the area around it had a big Jewish population. There was a lot of Jews in Eastern Europe in the medieval period. It's really not a big deal that they decided to add a synagogue. And then people were also saying that they didn't model any churches in-game to look through because they said they ran out of time. And then people were parlaying that into saying if they didn't add gay sex scenes, they could have had it done. The next DLC coming out is a church DLC. I do admit it is regrettable that they couldn't include anything from churches into the game, that you can't visit some of the great monasteries. But with the DLCs coming out, I think it'll be great. And then, I don't know, I think that complaint sort of falls flat. Just because I don't know how many people were actually so excited to go walk around the churches. And then not to mention how many people in-game are going to visit the synagogue. There is really just not a lot going on there. Go to church in real life, not in a video game. I also saw people take umbrage at the fact that there is a quest marker in-game that says go to an anti-Semites meeting. So people pointed out that anti-Semitism wasn't really a term until the 19th century. Fair enough. And then also, spoiler for that quest, there is not actually an anti-Semite meeting. That is just some cover that the Jews are using to lure you into a trap because they think you want to kill them. But people are very upset at the fact that, one, they like to point out that back then everybody was an anti-Semite, so of course there was. Okay, so what I would say to that is there's a difference between hating someone and then actively wanting to kill them. I mean, I don't know. The way you hear people talking about this game, you would think that, like, the Israeli government had a big hand in depicting the Jews. I don't know. I just don't see it. People are making a mountain out of a molehill. I just do not see the harm. Jews were a very big part of medieval culture and history. They were one of the only somewhat accepted minor religions, as paganism was obviously dying out and people were crusading against it. It's interesting to see Jewish culture, especially since it was such a big thing in medieval Bohemia. I know I sound like an Israeli shill right now. That is not the point I'm trying to make, but again, it is interesting to see cultures that are still alive now depicted back then in medieval times, especially since they were a rather big minority culture back then. I just truly do not find this game woke in any regards, and it still strives to maintain historical accuracy while still showcasing the wackiness of the medieval world and all the cultures and people who lived in it. The game never lies to you. There is a codex in-game with an insane amount of information, and when you learn something in-game, you can press in, it will bring up the codex, and it will tell you whether that happened, or where they took inspiration from, or what you're really looking at, and they tell you everything about it. So I'm sorry for even having to talk about this, but the Discord around it is so stupid, and everybody I see talking about it, it seems like they didn't play the game at all, and then they're acting like it's a commercial failure. It's already made a profit after the first day, and now they're starting to cope by saying, oh, but they burnt all their goodwill. People already pre-ordered. I mean, I don't know. I think Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is a great game and one of the best RPGs I have ever played. I would give it a 10 out of 10. Truly, any faults I found are easily outshined by how great of a game it is. That's all I have. Thanks for sticking around if you came to this. I don't have anything else. Like, subscribe, maybe check out my Twitter or Patreon. Hey, you know, that's all I got. Please remember that Jesus loves you, and I'm going to end this video with a great prayer from the game. So please listen and enjoy it.
He ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of God the Father Almighty. From thence he shall come to judge the living and the dead. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and life everlasting. Amen. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and life everlasting.